Good evening. I thought I'm going to make other video, which is sort of a little bit an update and an addendum to yesterday's video. And there's a few things I would like to clarify and further explain a little bit. And first of all, I would like to thank everyone who has subscribed to my channel, and thank you for the likes. When you like the videos, that's appreciated, and when you subscribe, that's appreciated as well. The first thing I wanted to clarify was my statement yesterday about Prussia being our territory. And not that someone is going to think here we're going to start another war with the Russian Federation to get East Prussia back, or whatever is left of it. And there's a reason for this. Prussia itself, I do not know on how much my viewers or you as a viewer know about the history of Prussia and how it came about and why this doesn't exist anymore. It did. Prussia never really existed as a state. It originated a long time ago, and it is primarily the city of Königsberg, today's Kaliningrad. That was the fortress for the Teutonic Order, the knighthood, a Catholic knighthood, I think since the 900 AD, 1100 AD, somewhere in that range. I'm not fully into the history of all these things, but somewhere around there. And our family, or my family side, originated out of the Swabian area around Stuttgart, south of Stuttgart. The Hohenzollern Castle is still there. That's the main line of the family. We have many branches, and I'm out of one of those sidelines or branches. I'm not on the main trunk. This is someone else. We have kind of shifted off there. But that is a completely separate story, and I really don't want to get into this at this point, because it's just going to be too drawn out and too dry of a subject to begin with, and probably not much of interest to the viewer. Anyway, we had then migrated up to Brandenburg, Berlin, that area, and that was a duchy. And in the 30-Year War, that was, my God, when was it, 1500, something like this? Or before then, actually, the 30-Year War, where all these different states and duchies and all of the stuff were fighting with each other, culminated or ended in the Truce of Westphalia. In one of these territories, which were in question or was involved in this, was of course Königsberg, Kaliningrad, with the Teutonic Order. They had fought in there too. And then what happened was, in the truce was negotiated with the King of Poland that the Duchy of Brandenburg would get that part of Kaliningrad plus some further eastward area, which I believe is Lithuania, which is next to it, where that belonged to, and some part of Poland. And that formed the basis for the Duchy of Prussia. And it was that part from Lithuania till maybe 100 miles from Danzig, Gdansk, the port city in Poland. And that was a free city to begin with. So, but that was basically the coming about. And the way the Duchy of Prussia then developed was that one of my ancestors became a reformist with Luther. That happened like in 1521, so over almost 500 years ago. And that split up, and he was part of the Teutonic Order. I think he was the Grand Master of the order at that point. And when he took the Duchy of Brandenburg from being Catholic to the newly found Lutheran faith or Protestant faith, That's when he had to resign as the Grand Master of the Teutonic Order, and the Duchy of Prussia became also Protestant at this point. But they were residing actually in Brandenburg. That was where the headquarters, so to speak, were. The fortress then, I don't know what the Teutonic Order did. I think they moved out of Prussia at one point or another. I'm not quite sure about this. The Teutonic Order still exists today and is physically located and headquartered in Vienna, Austria, because it's a Catholic order. And it has been there for a long time. I don't know where they were in between. But anyway, this was in 1521, so 500 years ago when that transpired. And the Duchy of Prussia remained a Dutch duchy until 1701 with my seventh grandfather, I think it was, who crowned himself and turned the Duchy of Prussia in Brandenburg into the Kingdom of Prussia. And that's where it remained. And then from there on, at that point, Königsberg was the residence of the king. He liked that old fortress, and he started the Order of the Black Eagle there with the crowning ceremony and everything else. At a later point, after he passed away, I think that was 1750, 1760, with Frederick the Great and Frederick III, they moved the whole residency of the king over to Brandenburg and to Berlin. They built the castles there, and that became then ultimately the central point of the Prussian kingdom, was then Berlin. Brandenburg at first, and then actually Berlin. I think they built that city castle around that time. And the city castle is somewhat similar to the old fortress in Königsberg. It was a kind of a square, little bit rectangular building, and the city castle was really never that nice as Sanssouci or any of the other castles they had, or Charlottenburg for that matter. It was more like the fortress, and the layout was the same, so the order could maintain their protocol, for their annual investiture, which is in January, and now I forgot the date, which I should know, but I forgot it. I think it is January 17th, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a, there's a protocol in this on how they go in with the guards, and they pick up the Grand Master, and he's let down then into the Hall of the Knights, and that's where the whole thing takes place. And then they had that there. And Berlin was basically the same layout, so they could follow the investiture process as it is written down in our bylaws and rules for the order, and that was all maintained. So, and basically Königsberg is really out in, that's the province. Kaliningrad, this is out in the boondocks. This is an 8-hour train ride from Berlin, and it took you by horse carriage probably the better of 4 or 5 days to get there back in those days. And in those years, since then, the Königsberg was nothing there anymore. The local people are primarily farmers, fishermen, since it is at the Baltic Sea, and local craftsmen, blacksmith, goldsmith, carpenters, that kind of trade was present in the city primarily. And we had a relatively large Jewish population, because one of the kings had granted the Jewish people, more or less asylum in Prussia. And also the French Huguenots were also welcomed into Prussia when they had to leave there because of their conflict with the Catholics. Anyway, so that kind of all was destroyed then in the end. It ended, Prussia remained with Germany after World War I. And but like I said, it was just the state of Prussia then, and Berlin was the capital of the state, of Prussia, which reached from Brandenburg basically back to that Lithuanian border, basically. And after World War II, or during World War II, when the Red Army came in, they occupied Prussia, East Prussia. And then basically when the war was over, it was settled by the Russians or by the Soviet Union that the original part of East Prussia went back to Poland. And that other part, it is really only a few hundred square miles. It is maybe 3, 4, 5 counties in size in comparison here in America. You know, if you want to look at the surface, the real estate, is not very much real estate there. And theoretically, actually almost 2/3 of that remaining, which is now occupied or was occupied by the Soviet Union, has been turned into the Kaliningrad Oblast. So they made this whole part basically one county to a more or less a degree. And they had basically leveled or destroyed the city the same way they had destroyed Mariupol at this point. That's close to what this looks like, or what Königsberg, Kaliningrad looked like it after World War II, is where they're getting to. So with this being said now, is technically 2/3 of that area, that Kaliningrad Oblast, actually belongs to Lithuania. So this has never been settled, which leaves you only basically with the city and the northern part up to the beachhead and these 3, 4 islands they got there in the Baltic Sea. And the reason why the Russians or the Soviet Union kept it was because that port they have remains pretty much ice-free for most of the years for their Baltic fleet. Because St. Petersburg freezes over. They have that channel going into the city from the Baltic area, and it is very much the most northern point almost of the Baltic Sea. And they have the tendency, or that tends to freeze over, and they cannot move in and out of that port during the winter time, which immobilizes the Baltic fleet. And they didn't really have any other ports to accommodate their Baltic fleet. So they stayed there. And that was the primary reason, was a military advantage for the Soviet Union, and then the Russians kept it afterwards for the very same reason. It had really not served anything. I have seen a couple movies there or videos about Kaliningrad just from the recent years, and the local people, the Prussian people there, the Jewish people, of course, had a very terrible fate with the Nazis. They were all pretty much eliminated in Auschwitz and in the other eastern concentration camps. So the Prussian population fled. I think there may have been 100,000, 250,000, something like this, when the Red Army was approaching in their counter-offensive. And I think that happened like that must have been in the middle of 1944, somewhere around there. They were put on boats. They left by, with horse carriages and ox and cart and that sort of stuff. And they moved west. That's what they did. And they became part, or they settled then in Western Germany. Most of them went all the way to West Germany, what became then West Germany. And whatever was left there was then forcefully moved out by the Red Army and by the Soviet administration when they had taken over. And all these people then were replaced by Russian citizens mostly. So these are now the people who have been there pretty much since 1946, 1947. Are all of Russian, they're Russian citizens and of Russian origin. And they have rebuilt Königsberg. I mean, they tore down the old castle, the old fortress. And interestingly enough, the Soviet Union built a kind of an office building, it looks like it, on there, which is called the House of Soviet. And it was never finished, and it is dilapidating now on the same spot. All of the other architectural, in points of interest in the city were more or less rebuilt in the last 20 years. And from what I've seen in the videos, it looks quite nice. And these people have some form of a connection, to Germany or to Prussia. You see some German words and the businesses incorporated and that sort of stuff. But for us, really, it was irrelevant. Königsberg was irrelevant because we did not belong to the Teutonic Order. So for us, it didn't have any religious value. And like I said, it's the Order of the Black Eagle and the Order of the Red Eagle, our primary orders for the Kingdom of Russia. Prussia was moved to Berlin to begin with. And that really left Königsberg or Kaliningrad as just a city somewhere far, far away from the main center out in the province with no real industry. There was never any manufacturing or anything. So we, as a territory, it is small. You're looking, like I said, this is a very small piece of land. And that is definitely not even worth trying to fight a war over to get this back. And then the other thing is, technically, 2/3 of this was what is, like I said, is under Russian occupation today, is actually belongs physically to Lithuania. So, and of course, the Russians won't be too excited to give that back to Lithuania, especially now under the given circumstances. And that would leave us only with the city of Kaliningrad. And now you had people living there for the last 70 plus years, They have found a new home there. You don't want to really displace these people. There's no reason to find a war over. And it was never a center. It was the center, the ideology, no, I'm sorry. It was the center for the Teutonic Order. Like I said, that was a Catholic order, and that part of the world, or that part of Europe, hasn't been Catholic since 1521. So 501 years ago, it changed. And the Teutonic Order today is in Vienna. Okay, so I think that should clarify that no one thinks, oh my God, are they going to start another war? Did they want this back or no? We were finished with this in 1760, technically, so to speak. It served us only for a few years as residents. When Napoleon moved through, that was around, 1804 until 1812. For that time, my third great-grandfather was born there. He was the youngest child, so that's why we're only a sideline of the king. And, we had just administrative and military jobs in this whole machinery that was about as far as it went. And so he was basically born there, but other than this, there is no sentimental value attached to this. For the Prussian people who were displaced, most of them who were displaced as children, there's only a few of them left today in Germany. They probably have traveled now there to see it, and maybe they have some contacts there. But for us as Hohenzollerns, this thing was more or less irrelevant, or it has been irrelevant for a long time. So we're not interested in any type of, getting this back and getting that restructured. And we would have to deal with the Polish government to see if we can. No one wants to go there. This is just a past. It came out of a truce in 15, or whenever that was, after the 30-year war. I forgot exactly the dates on this. It may have been 14 something before Luther did the Reformation. Already, and then that's how Prussia was created, and then it basically was dissolved back to more or less to what it was before in 1945. And we leave it by that. That is good enough. So unless someone else in Europe wants to get rid of the Russians there, that's a different story. But this wouldn't have anything to do with us. I just wanted to explain that, to make that clear for the record. The other thing today is I have been reading the TASS, the official Russian news organization they have. The TASS has been around for a long time. It started in the Tsarian Empire. And the readers in Russia primarily is the middle class, intellectual middle class, upper middle class who read the TASS. And I'm not easily bamboozled by propaganda. And I've learned during the Cold War in the jobs I had, or the affiliations I had in our, Western system, military, and that sort of stuff, on how to read foreign propaganda, basically, to dissect it or to understand it, to analyze it. And the picture they're painting in TASS is already from a strategy pointing in a direction. They're showing, or starting to show, for instance, Germany wants to deliver heavy weapons, bad country. China remains neutral, good country. So they're pointing this out. Holland is trying to send heavy weapons, bad country, and so on and on it goes. When you read through this, it is not in a very verbalized bad way, but the reader gets the impression that these countries are against us. And the people who are reading this mostly is the middle management and upper management of companies, Russian companies as well as Western companies, the employees there. And of course, that is gonna sink in when you read this every day. So the propaganda machine there is in full swing. And, for the different backgrounds of people, I don't want to use the class word, but, some of them is more verbally aggressive in certain papers or news channels, like you have it here in the United States too. When you watch CNN, some people watch Fox News, and then some people, they go even further online to certain people listen to the talk heads there in their daily casts, whatever they have. And, you get radicalized from one direction or the other. And this is more like on the mainstream side for the comparable with the Washington Post, not necessarily the Wall Street, but the New York Times, that kind of thing, but of course directed in their direction. So this is what I'm looking at, because these people will, after the war, there will be an end to this war at one point or another. And they will be then tainted. So they came in before that special military operation with a positive view about Europe or the West. A lot of them worked or have been working for Western companies. And if this goes back to any form of normality before, you're going to have a changed workforce. This is going to complicate the operations for Western companies a lot when it gets to this point. Now, what they also have been writing about, which I would take serious, is the great possibilities that the Russians government basically calls this sanctions. And what they mean as sanctions is they're going to expropriate the Western companies in the Russian Federation, whether they're operational at this point or non-operational, whether they have closed down or they're still working. The first threat towards Western companies was that they threatened to lock up jail, literally jail the workforce, the employees of those companies, until the Western company basically agrees to reopen the operation. So that's why a lot of Western companies are still operating in the Russian Federation, because the workforce is Russian. And eventually, I think that they're going to do this. If there's any more sanctions coming from the Western world, that they're going to expropriate all of the stuff. They're going to keep the Russian workforce, which knows how to operate these companies basically from top to bottom and pretty much anything in between. And they're going to start shifting this over. You're going to see the expropriation, and that's what the task pointed out. The other thing is what I saw today, or what we got to see, was the presentation of Satan 2. I forgot now what the Russian name is for the intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. Interesting. The threat is not more or less than before, because if you're old enough, you will remember the strategy of the Cold War, which was MAD, M-A-D, mutually assured destruction. That means whoever fires his nuclear weapons first dies second. Because once they're shooting them and they're inbound, the other side is going to launch their ICBMs with warheads, and then they're going to go off on both ends, and neither one of the countries survives. That is what kept the Cold War, this concept, from turning hot. And this is not going to be any different now. I do not think that Putin or the Russian government is going to risk a ICBM confrontation with the United States or China or any other country with ICBMs to wind up being destroyed second. It didn't happen from 1945 until 1991, and it is most likely not going to happen now. The bigger danger is that they may use localized nuclear bombs on a battlefield area and that sort of stuff, more a focus thing. But then the Russians would have to face the consequences of that too, which could then culminate in a mad situation. These are very, very tricky things. The other thing which I got to know today is the German television had the second in command of the Bundeswehr at their morning show, and he explained in more detail the Ukrainian government had requested the Marder, which is a heavy artillery type piece of equipment, and the Bundeswehr has 400 of them. And 100 of them are used for training purposes and spare parts. And all 300 of them have been deployed from the Slovak border to the Ukraine, all the way up the eastern flank, and then in Lithuania and the other two Baltic states up there. So they're stretched to the limits within their NATO rapid response force with 13,000 men and 300 vehicles, besides other tank and heavy artillery. What they have, they're basically on DEFCON 3, 4, if not even 5 at this point. Or 1, the other way, goes up DEFCON. They might be DEFCON 2 at this point, DEFCON 1. I'm not quite sure. It's pretty traumatic. So the Ukraine then said, well, you can send us your training vehicles. And the Bundeswehr said, no, because these vehicles need to be here because we're cannibalizing them for parts, to have immediate parts available for the front lines, for one. And the other thing is, like I said, is the rapid training program is fully enacted at this point. So that means if the combat starts, the new recruits are going to be trained on those vehicles which are back in the home base, and then sent to the front lines to take over the vehicles if the crew is unavailable at that point. So they can rapidly train people on this. So they cannot give any of those Marders away to the Ukrainian army. The reason why the Bundeswehr doesn't have enough was because they were not doing the 2% annual budget thing. And they had been underfunded or run underfunded for almost 20 years now. So they have a lack of a lot of things, and it is primarily with spare parts and enough running vehicles to begin with. So out of the 400, they probably have 375 functioning, where 25 of them are functioning to a point where they can be used as spare parts. So you have 25 which are garbage, 25 who have been cannibalized already, another 25 which are ready to be cannibalized, and then you're going to have 50 left for training and cannibalization if it comes to this. And because, like I said, it's the entire industry, defense industry in Germany has not accelerated the pace yet in production of any of the stuff. Because they were still in peace mode, you know, they're not in a mobilization modus to mobilize for war in this, and that entails, of course, the defense sector in every aspect of it, with the availability of parts and replacement vehicles. They haven't started this yet. They may be getting ready for this. That is beyond my knowledge, but that could be quite possible. Well, anyway, I thought I'm going to share this with you. Please like my channel if you like it. Please subscribe. I would be happy if you would. And I think we have covered pretty much everything. I will check back in if there's any major movements or news coming out, and then see what we got there. And I hope I didn't bore you too much with my almost, I think, 15-20 minutes of the history of Prussia in an abbreviated version of it, and some of the dates might be not right. I can't remember all of the stuff. I don't have a PhD in history, you know, and family is family, so you don't worry about it that much. And who took a dump at what time and what place, you know, who cares? Anyway, we're living in today, in the here and now, and not back in 1521 and that sort of stuff. So I'm not really that interested in it. I got a general idea. If you want to know more about the Teutonic Order and that sort of stuff, the best thing probably is to Google it or see what they have here on YouTube in terms of documentaries or information on it. You know, you probably will find a lot more insight into this of who said what, and you know, so I may have said it was, I think it was 1521 when that change came. It could have been 1523, it could have been 1525, somewhere around there, you know, give and take a few years or so, a couple decades up and down or something like this. That can happen. You know, I wish I can remember that. I can't even remember sometimes, some days, what I just did 5 minutes ago or where I put something. So I'm glad when I, you know, just keep up with the daily things I needed to do. And thank you again for watching my channel. And I hope we're going to build up a little bit of a following here and see that we get some information to you which might be helpful or interesting. And with that, you have a great evening.